We're all rough drafts of the people we're still becoming. Bob Goff. Think about the last time you told yourself, I've got this. It probably wasn't because whatever you had going was easy. More than likely, not because it was simple, but because you didn't want anyone else to carry what you considered your responsibility. Self-reliance is usually born from the best parts of us. And yet, it's one of the easiest ways to slowly and quietly wear ourselves down. Most of us grow up believing that independence is the goal. Stand on your own, handle your business, solve your problems, stay strong. And yes, in a broad, overall picture kind of sense, that's good because there's value in it. There's dignity in it. There's our pride in that. But here's the problem. When independence becomes the only gear you use, it stops being strength and starts becoming a slow form of self-damage. You won't notice it at first. We rarely do. Because it feels like you're disciplined. It feels like you're focused. It feels like you're being mature. But over time, that focus gets narrow. Your world gets smaller. And the only voice you hear is your own. We're led to believe that struggle builds character. And in many instances, it can. It absolutely can. But when you grind everything out alone, that doesn't build character. It builds distance. Distance from people. Distance from clarity. Distance from yourself. You start carrying things you don't need to carry and holding things you should have let go of. Simply because asking for help or assistance feels like losing control or taking a step backwards. You tell yourself that you're being strong. You tell yourself that you're being responsible. But really, you're holding inside you the only method you trust. You pull back from others one, I'm fine, at a time. One, I'll take care of it, at a time. And you convince yourself you're keeping life simple. But what you're really doing is cutting off the very things that give your life depth, the necessary perspective, a level of creativity, and of connection. Those three things are what feed your growth. But they disappear when your world becomes a single point of contact, when the only voice is yours. If left unchecked, that's what isolation looks like, masquerading as discipline. And what's worse, it's not dramatic. It doesn't wave its hands and jump up and down to remind you. It just slowly turns your life into a survival loop instead of a growth path. Now, I'm not telling you to abandon being independent. Quite the opposite, actually. Independence is a gift, but gifts can be misused. And when we misuse independence, it becomes our armor. It becomes our identity. It becomes a pressure on us. Yes, armor helps you survive, but it rarely helps you grow. Growth requires something else. It requires a level of openness. It requires curiosity. It requires feedback. It requires the courage to ask, what am I missing? How am I contributing to this problem? Where am I limiting myself? And those questions get sharper, more poignant, and more honest when they're not asked of the person who's in the mirror. If they're asked at all. If you're like me and you love your coffee, my go-to lately has been Blue Line Roasting. They're a Tennessee-based and law enforcement-owned company, roasting small batches of premium beans. You've got choices from Patriot, which is their light roast, to Failure Drill, their dark roast. They roast all their beans fresh, within 48 hours, and ship them to you even faster. You can also get your beans ground for you or delivered whole. Your choice. But here's the cool part. A portion of what you spend goes to support law enforcement families dealing with the impact of line-of-duty injuries or loss. You get an incredible coffee, and they get the help they need. Choose a single bag, a sample pack, or start a subscription so you're never out of coffee. Oh, and shipping is always free. Also, for the listeners of this podcast, use the promo code TRANSITION10 to get 10% off your purchase. So head over to bluelineroasting.com and make every cup count. Many of us have this myth of perfection, of doing everything ourselves. We're never going to ask for help. Funny thing is, while we're in the middle of whatever it is, we'll cuss and we'll say to ourselves, Jace, I can sure use some help. We're all just rough drafts, not final copies, not the finished book, definitely not a polished masterpiece. We're rough drafts, which means it's in our nature. It's part of our DNA to be refined, to be improved, to be challenged, and eventually to be shaped. But none of that happens in isolation, at least not the healthy kind anyway. There's a cost to extreme independence, and it's not something dramatic like you might imagine. It's a slow erosion. It's the little things. You stop noticing that you're tired. You stop noticing you're restless. You stop noticing how quickly you get irritated. You stop noticing how hard you are on yourself. You start living inside your head more than you live inside your life. And if we're honest with ourselves, that's what wears people down. When you carry everything alone, you don't break. You simply weaken, but without realizing it. Not saying anything, being stoic, or a phrase that you've likely heard, suffering in silence, can feel like you're in control. It can feel like calmness. It can feel like discipline. But silence has a dark side. It shuts out the world. It shuts out feedback, and it shuts out the truth. You start believing your own thoughts because you're not seeking any type of pushback. And that's dangerous because every one of us has blind spots. And sometimes the thing you think is strength is actually the thing limiting you. Sometimes the thing you call responsibility is actually the pressure you don't really need to carry alone. Sometimes what you call resilience is actually fear just wearing a happy face mask. So how do you shift this? How do you stay independent without falling into self-damage? You start by seeing that connection is part of discipline, not a threat to discipline. You start recognizing that support isn't weakness, it's efficiency. You start recognizing that growth doesn't happen when you hold everything in. It happens when you allow a little help in, when you allow a little perspective in, and when you allow a little feedback. You don't have to reveal everything where you're vulnerable to the point of weakness, but you do have to reveal something. A door only needs to be open a crack to let fresh air in. And sometimes that little opening is what saves you. Real strength isn't about carrying the most. Real strength is about carrying what actually matters. Real strength isn't measured by how quiet you are. Real strength is measured by how clear you are. And clarity requires input. When you listen to others, you don't surrender your independence. You sharpen it. When you ask for perspective, you don't lose control. You gain direction. When you invite support, you don't jeopardize confidence. You secure it. That's how we grow. That's how meaningful progress happens. That's how resilience deepens. Not in isolation, but in connection. And you might be hearing this and thinking to yourself, I'm fine. I've always done it this way. And I get that. Trust me, I get it. Habits feel safe. Routines feel predictable. Saying, I'll take care of it, gives you that feeling of control. But just because something feels familiar or feels comfortable doesn't mean it's healthy. And just because it worked in one aspect doesn't mean it'll carry you through the next. Personal growth demands new tools, new conversations, new levels of honesty and perspective. And maybe the next version of your life, the next level of your leadership, the next chapter of your growth requires you to let someone else play a role. Not so that they control it or dominate it, just to contribute to it. Because you're a rough draft. And rough drafts become better through revisions, reflection, and relationships. So here's your challenge. Ask yourself, If I wasn't trying to prove anything today, what would I allow myself to accept? If I didn't equate help with weakness, what kind of strength could I build? If I stopped carrying everything alone, how much more energy, clarity, and purpose would I actually have? Strength isn't solo. Strength is being honest with yourself. Strength is being aware of your limitations. Strength is willing. Strength is accepting you can't lift it all. And if you've built your whole identity around doing it all yourself, this might be the hardest shift you've ever made, but it'll also be the most freeing. Because the version of you that grows the most won't be the one that did everything alone. It'll be the one that finally understood that self-reliance is powerful, but connection is transformative. And that is where your next level begins. As always, thanks for spending a few minutes with me. Until next time, stay sharp, stay grounded, and keep showing up.